Hello there, sword fans. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. It's a custom, one-of-a-kind type piece, and I've actually sold it, but the new owner said that he wouldn't mind if I made a video about it before I sent it off, so that's what I'm going to do here. It's a bit of a visual tour. It might inspire you or give you some ideas on collections or custom projects that you might have, since you theoretically could buy some of the pieces on here. Anyway, I won't be breaking it or testing it or anything like that. It's a bit of a talkie head visual tour type thing. I should also note that this sword is from an eBay seller named Komonjo, or at least I think that's what it is. And there's folks in the Nihonto community that have a lot of things to say about komonjo. There's some doubt about the prestige or provenance of the sword and who made it, and if they are fakes or where they were made. There's all sorts of doubt cast around that. And I'll talk a little bit about it, but I'm not an expert on it, and I only have opinions on the subject for what that's worth. Anyway, there's the context. I'll talk a little bit first about the end and work my way down. First, we have a silver Higo set from Fred Lohman Company. I believe that's what these are. They start to tarnish a bit like silver, so that's at least reassuring that the silver pieces are that. And it's a Higo set, which is one that I'm really a fan of. It has this kind of classic shape to it, and the way it's lined up here is overall pretty good. What I do notice is that the person that tied it, admittedly, they're not an expert at this thing. It was a bit of a somebody practicing their skills, and frankly I couldn't do as well, but they're not a professional at it, so there's bound to be some misses here and there. The kashira can wiggle around a little bit. I can pull it. A little bit of adhesive would probably clear that up. I could probably get a little type of glue or some sort of substance to hold it down, because it doesn't appear that there's any on there, and the silk has loosened in such a way that I can give it a little bit of a pull. Not so much that it comes off freely though, it's just a little bit on the loose side. As I move down, transition wise are actually pretty good, which is nice because if you're an amateur doing these things and you get the transition right, that's certainly off to a good start. The Ito tightness on here is reasonably good. It's not as tight as it could be, but again, tighter than a lot of the swords that I get out of China, so that much is at least good. It's black silk over black lacquered semigawa, and the nodule size on here appears to be pretty large. I don't know if it's a full wrap or a partial wrap of semigawa. I'm not entirely sure on that one. The silk seems pretty good. There's some stains here and there, but overall it's reasonably handsome looking. I always like the black on black with silver. It's certainly a bold look, and one that I happen to like. It has a floral manuki, and I would speculate that these manuki may be antiques. I'm not entirely sure. This one's a bit bulbous. It's actually locked in there pretty good for being as bulbous as it is. If I move some of the diamonds around, I can also spot that there are hishigami in here, which is again a pleasant thing to see, and I don't spot them anywhere, so it's not so loose that the hishigami are falling out, which is good. The other side, again, I speculate these are antiques because the detail on them appears to be pretty good. They appear worn in some spots, and I would venture a guess that these have some carving elements rather than just casting, which is the way the rest of the fittings are. Anyway, some detail on the floral manuki that are nice to see. Moving up, we have one makugi here. It's relatively small. I could probably push it in a little bit further, but it appears to be made out of horn or delrin or something harder. It's not made of wood. It's also on the small side, and it's fit in such a way that it does actually tighten the sword up. You'll see later that the makugi ana is actually rather large, and the makugi is rather small. So the way the sword handle is made, it does actually apply pressure correctly and tighten the handle down, which is a tough thing to nail if you're not a really experienced sword mounter. So that much is at least nice. The transition to the fuchi, it's a little bunchy up here, but overall pretty nice. And again, the silver Higo fitting on here is classic and very pleasant looking to my eye. The Suba is, again, one I believe from Fred Lohman, depicting a very large-scale samurai battle, and there's very detailed figures on here. And this Suba in particular, I think, highlights some of what the Lohman Subas are capable of doing. Their casting quality is really quite good, and this kind of shows it. This level of Suba on maybe a Hanwei or something like that would be similar in detail, but it's not common to get things as crisp. You can make out a lot of details in the faces and the armor and things like that you wouldn't be able to do on a lot of them. They tend to look a lot more subdued, or maybe the molds are used a lot more. In this case, there's a lot of detail in here. These are not inexpensive fittings. A whole set could run you $700 or $1,000 in silver, but what you do get is some good for what they are, cast fittings, and there are a lot of details to see in here which are pretty cool, and it lets you build and tell your own story on a project, which is kind of cool. There's a lot of mix and match things that you can do. Anyway, this happens to be one that I really like. The front face of the Tsuba, or the back face of the Tsuba shows the back of the samurai. The front face shows the front of them. And again, just there's a lot of, you can make out details in the waves and the clouds. Things that are soft are supposed to be soft. Things that are coarse are coarser in texture. I happen to think the execution on this Tsuba is pretty good, and a good case for why Lomin fittings might cost what they do. Before I move to the blade, I'll talk briefly about the scabbard. This got run a little bit thin, and so along the back side here, it is cracked, and that's an unfortunate thing. You can't notice it, and you might be able to get glue or something in here, but there's a little crack along the seam of the scabbard. Some minor, I think there might be a minor chip here or there, but the same Higo Kojiri is on the end here, which is nice, and it has this lovely fade. It has black to a gray texture, or a gray gloss look, and I happen to think that this is just killer looking. I haven't seen any fade done like this before, and I think it's a killer idea, and it worked really well in this case. I really like the execution on this, from black to a dark gray. It's subtle, and it almost looks like it's, perfect fit with this sageo. Sometimes the sageo can really tie a sword together, pun intended, I guess, but it also has a light fade moving from the white to the darker gray on the sageo. So the combination, this really feels like it's married to the sword pretty well. There's a silver Kurigata on here, and the silver does tend to patina in certain ways. I can start to see it on here, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the silver Kurigata is on here. And again, these little bits of jewelry from the Kojiri and the Kurigata, the fade and the sageo, really, I think, make this a very bold and appealing wall art, if nothing else. Even though the sword is quite real and sharp, it's certainly more than wall art. There's a lot of bold, pretty things to see on here that make it a very nice decoration as well. So habaki and seppa. Seppa are brass, habaki is copper. I'm not a big fan of the mix of metals. It would have been nice to have an all silver thing here, given that there's so much silver on the handle and the rest. Having brass and copper, some people really like it. It's an artistic detail that I didn't particularly like the choice of. The brass isn't so bad in the floral area. There's one little bit of brass, so I don't mind the brass and silver as much, but the copper habaki does stand out. The habaki, I would speculate, is actually made by the man in black. I don't know for certain, but it looks similar to his work and his rokusho patina pattern. It looks like there's been some schmutz stuck on it that is not likely from the man in black, but this does look like it's copper work. It's also a well-made habaki. It fits well, it's tensioned well in the scabbard. I should mention that. If I go up here, it's tensioned well, slight rattle, not a lot. It's not at the end. I think it's the scabbard being on the thin side and touch. Anyway, a little bit of rattle, not a lot. Tension actually fits well. It doesn't bounce around. All right, the blade, the pointy stabby part. So this one is a big, wide, imposing blade. It's differentially hardened. You can make out a lot of details in the hamon. The Kisaki has a yukote on it. It's not geometric, but it does appear like perhaps it was burnished in some way. The polish is relatively, it's not an artistic polish or anything, but it's detailed enough to make out some of the cool bits on the sword. And there's little issues, little scratches and things like that seem to be common on komonjo blades. So more about that. So komonjo is an eBay seller. Hopefully I'm saying the name right. And he sells a lot of different, I don't know if it's a he or she, but they sell a lot of different types of blades, and they're usually not terribly expensive. Some of them are rusted and need a polish. Some of them are signed and polished, like I would speculate this one was, because the polish looks very similar to what he sells. And there's some speculation about where they come from. Now, if it's a Japanese-made sword, that would likely make the cost very, very high. The signatures are not likely genuine. They could be. I guess I don't really know. I've never checked, but it's speculated that the signatures are not accurate to the smith, or that the smith isn't anyone on record. There's a lot of stuff, and I haven't looked into it a whole lot. What I can say about them is that the swords themselves don't look like swords that I typically see out of China, and I've had a few of them in my hands, you might say. The pattern, the shapes, the sizes are not the same as the types of mass production swords that I get to see in my hand. The weight's different, the nakagos are different, There's a lot of things that theoretically could be faked, certainly, but they at least don't bear a lot of similarity to many of the swords that I see out of China. Doesn't mean that they're not made there or that they're made in Japan, definitely, but they're at least not rebadged things that are mass-produced by the thousands. They are certainly different in shape. Further, they tend to be pretty good-looking. There's a lot of detail in the hamon. There's a lot of differences in shapes and sizes and things that are sold there. So if nothing else, they are pretty interesting blades. Some of them have more activity in the hada than others. This one, I can't say that I specifically make out a hada. On the nakago, I can see what look like cold shuts or spots where the welds haven't taken as much. And so there's some indication that this was folded in some way, but that's from the nakago. And again, something that I tend to see on blades from the komonjo is that the nakagos have some sort of folding indication or flaw, minor typically. This, I don't see any issue on the blade itself apart from the kind of scratches and whatnot, imperfections. And there's some cool details to be seen in the hamon as well. I think it's a very handsome blade. So my general thoughts are you're getting a handsome blade that is unique and likely forged out, because I don't see a mold like this. If this was a sword that I could buy out of China, I probably would get one because it's my size. So anyway, it's not common, if anything else, based on the experiences I've had getting swords in abundance out of China. But who made it? Is it a genuine Nihonto? What is it is certainly up for speculation, and that's where I think it drives a lot of collectors mad. So what you get, though, is at least a nice looking sword, and that's about it. Generally speaking, the swords tend to be $500 to $1,000. Sometimes I'm sure they go for more. I've been out of touch. I haven't bid on one in a hot minute. But I've had a few of them in time, and this seems to be pretty representative of the ones that are polished. There's errant imperfections and oddnesses and some things like that, but overall they're certainly nice looking swords. They do tend to be a little bit soft as well, so I haven't cut with this one. There's no cutting scratches on it. There's some small scratches, but they're not from me. I have cut with a komonjo blade though, and the one that I spent any amount of time with, that I actually did some cutting with, tended to be a little bit soft, and it would take a bend, not in a way that made me think it wasn't heat treated or something. It took a bend similar to the Hataya Katetsu blades that I've cut with, which are renowned lawnmowers if you're in the Toyama circles, and you do a lot of tamashigiri. But bad cuts would leave it a little bit bent, and it could be straightened out, and I've had that experience with many cutting blades. So they didn't tend to be as forgiving as others, but that would be par for the course if it is made in any kind of traditional sense. I didn't have problems with it chipping or anything like that. This one may be completely different though, so I really have no idea if it's made by the same person, but there are a lot of similarities, a lot of different names on the komonjo blades that run in this price point, and a lot of similarities in how they look and the patterns and the polishing and things like that. What that means though, I really don't know. Blade profile wise, there's very clean lines. The shinogi is reasonably crisp, again for a sword that's not terribly expensive. This was by the time it's all done, it's a little bit on the pricey side, but in terms of Japanese style blades, it's on the high mass production side of things. So by the time you get it all done, the shinogi and the lines are pretty clean. There's more ripples in the mune, and the line on here is not as clean, but it doesn't waver and jitter around a lot. And anyway, compelling, interesting piece. Lots of cool activity in the hamon. I happen to like that, and definitely a big, bold-looking theme. Incidentally, I did take this apart. The nakago is nubby and only goes down to about here. It's pretty short, and the person that mounted this wanted a longer handle and wanted it to be scary. Personally, I'd like it if the handle lost about 4 inches and was about 9 or 10 inches long. I think, honestly, I would like the sword a lot more if that were the case. Might not be selling it if that were the case, though. So anyway, that's what I have. If you know more details about komonjo blades, throw them down in the commentary down below. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I know that some people have very strong opinions about anything that might be modern forgeries. I know some folks have had some opinions about them being potentially like black markety, starving smith sold things. I've heard a lot of different stories about them, but if you have any, I'm certainly always open to hearing more. Further, my take is that you get a decent sword. I mean, if you go into it not expecting it to be a awesome collector's grade investment piece that you got for a song, and you're looking for a blade that is functional and has some aesthetic qualities that you like in that particular blade, then you at least get a usually functional sword. But if you're trying to do like zombie apocalypse stuff with it, they're probably a bit on the soft side. So it's some odd balance between like wanting a Japanese style sword that has some characteristics of it, being on a budget, and being able to accept some things that are likely artistic interpretations of Japanese style swords. Anyway, I still think you get a decent sword, and the cost is maybe too high, maybe not. But I'm interested in what people think about the komonjo pieces. It's always fun conversation, if nothing else. So that's what I've got. That was this project. If you subtract the drama that might surround the komonjo piece, I think the fitting set really came together. This is like a cooler version of the Oni katana. It tells a different samurai story, and it's not demon themed, but I like the silver on black. I think that is super cool. And I love this fade and the sageo, how the paint job was tied into the sageo. Another one of my favorite features of this sword. Anyway, that's all I've got. This one needs to get oiled up and boxed out and sent out. If you have any questions, throw them in the commentary down below. Always happy to try and answer them if I can. That's all I've got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.